Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me for the 8th episode in the Conversation with Alan series. I started this series to have open and honest discussions about the rise of hate, the rise of racism, and the rise of anti-Semitism in the United States, with high hopes that it leads to conversations that make us all think about our own place in history and what we can do to support one another and change this path that we are on and stop this virus of hate that is spreading through so many of our communities today. Joining me for this conversation this evening are well-known actors and friends B.D. Wong and Jose Llana. Both men are here tonight to help celebrate Asian Pacific Heritage Month and talk about the rise of violence, xenophobia, and bigotry against the Asian Pacific community stemming from the COVID-19 pandemic. And later on in the show, I will speak to a friend's daughter, a 15-year-old Asian American girl who was verbally attacked while out shopping with her father. Both BD and Jose have been outspoken about the rise of violence aimed at the Asian Pacific community. In March, the Stop AAPI Hate organization released a report examining incidents that took place over roughly a year period during the coronavirus pandemic. It revealed that the number of incidents reported surged from 3,795 to 6,603. And an April report mentioned that there was a 169% surge in anti-Asian hate crimes during the first quarter of this year within New York City alone. B.D. Wong is a Drama Desk Outer Critics Circle, Theater World, Clarence Derwent, and Tony Award winner for his Broadway debut in M. Butterfly, an achievement not yet duplicated by another actor. He is known to television and movie audiences for his roles in Bird Box, Jurassic Park, Mr. Robot, Law & Order SVU, Awkwafina is Nora from Queens, to name just a very small few. He has been honored by the Asian American Legal Defense Fund, Asian AIDS Project, GLAAD, National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, the Anti-Violence Project, Lambda Legal, the Museum of Chinese in America, and Marriage Equality New York. Jose Llana starred as the King of Siam in Lincoln Center Theater's Tony Award-winning production of Rodgers and Hammerstein's The King and I, and continued his star turn in the U.S. tour and recently completed his run in the U.K. and international tour. Jose is perhaps best known for his portrayal as President Marcos in David Byrne and Fatboy Slim's Here Lies Love at the Public Theater, garnering him a Lucille Lortel Award nomination for Best Actor in a Musical. His extensive theater credits include roles on Broadway in the 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee, Wonderland, Flower Drum Song, and Rent. On screen, fans will recognize him from HBO's Sex and the City opposite Margaret Cho and opposite Will Smith in Hitch. It is really my distinct pleasure to welcome B.D. Wong and Jose Llana to the Locher Room.
Hello.
Gentlemen,
Hi.
thank you so much for being here. It means a lot.
It's great. You're doing something super meaningful, and we're happy to kind of, participate.
Agreed.
Well, I appreciate that. BD, I wanted to, take me back to your childhood. You grew up in San Francisco.
I did. Yeah.
You were afraid of what I was going to say.
Well, I mean, that always is it's such a can of worms, right? Oh, take me. Well, I was born and, I grew up in San Francisco. And, the first thing that always comes to mind is that San Francisco was a great place to grow up simultaneously Asian American and gay. I grew up during this kind of sexual revolution, and there was gay energy around, and there was a way for me to process what was happening with me, as a young boy, kind of learning about who he was. And then as an Asian American, I was surrounded by culture, all different kinds of culture, but specifically my heritage is Chinese American, and there are a lot of Chinese people in San Francisco, and there's a tremendous Chinatown there. And so I had an experience that was lucky, I think, having gone out into the world now and seeing, the other kinds of places that one can grow up. This for me was really, really a lucky environment to grow up in. And so that's the first thing I would have to say about San Francisco that I'm really, feel lucky about.
Right. Absolutely. And Jose, you were born in the Philippines, but grew up in the DC suburb, right?
That's right. My mom worked at the IMF, and she got a job at the UN first, and brought my sister and me here when I was 3 and 4 years old. And I grew up in the suburbs of DC, Northern Virginia, and had pretty much your typical suburban Virginian, Washingtonian upbringing. But the cool thing is that I would say, because it was the international kind of communities, and the suburbs of DC were very much, a reflection of the international kind of things that are happening in DC. I really felt like I grew up in a pretty diverse community. And then I went to a math and science magnet high school that was pretty much like 60% Asian American. So I had a lot of friends who were Asian American growing up. And so I didn't really get, and when I decided to go to New York to try to be a singer and be an actor, it wasn't until I moved to New York where I was kind of just, the mirror was put up to my face and I was basically told, no, you can't do this because you're Asian, like the theater stuff, And so it was pretty interesting to go from that kind of extreme where I was like the lead in shows in high school because it was, half the drama department's Asian American, so I could play any part I wanted to. And then the reality hits when you move to New York and you're told, oh, you're this type and you're this and that. So it was a blessing to grow up with that kind of diversity, but then the rude awakening when you move to New York City and the rest of the world is not that little community that you grew up with. So
yeah, it's so interesting, and for both of you, I think it's so great that you grew up in a community with others like yourself, because that is important, and I think that's where it becomes difficult for some kids going out into life when they don't grow up in a community. I think, for me, like I said, I mean, I grew up in, to me, I don't think it was a Jewish community, and growing up, I didn't really talk about being Jewish, I think because of my parents' experience, very differently. Maybe if I had grown up in a Jewish community, I would have been more forthcoming. But people would used to ask me what I was, and I would never open up and say that I was Jewish. I'd say guess, because most people would think I looked Italian or Spanish.
Yes, right.
Yeah, but it's so interesting. Was race a conversation you had at home as young kids? Do you recall?
Not in my family. I mean, there was. I did grow up around the time in which civil rights and the civil rights movement and a lot of outside news reflected a discussion about race. And there were, things like kids were bused to my school. And so I was engaged in a discussion about what that meant and why and who, and we were at war in Vietnam. And there was there were a lot of layers of kind of microaggressions that occurred because, I was Asian, not Vietnamese, but Asian. And then we were, at war in Vietnam. And so it was kind of, that could create situations. But I didn't have a discussion I didn't have sit downs with my parents about me being a person of color and what that meant going out into the world, really kind of at all.
Jose?
I think, yes, but the same with BD. I don't think my parents and I had conversations about it, but it was very prevalent. Because I was an immigrant, that was the first thing. My sister and I worked very hard to lose our accents. Her more than me, because she was already 5 and 6 years old. She was already in kindergarten when we got here, and so it was very important to our parents that we didn't speak with our accents, because it would make people treat us differently. And I felt bad for my dad, because he had to come here and get a job, and we lived in New York before we moved to Virginia. He was treated pretty badly, and I think it really kind of burned him a little bit. And and he would never say it today, but I remember as a kid he would kind of write off entire groups of people because of one person that treated him badly. And it's that experience that kind of shapes you, And I remember growing up thinking, "Well, Dad, you shouldn't say that. that one person who cut you off on the road does not represent their entire race of people, So." But but it was prevalent because we were part of a small Filipino American community that we found a lot of strength in, and it was kind of like us against the world kind of thing. And I think that's what immigrants do. They cluster together, and with that come prejudices. Where they said, don't go to this store because of that, and don't go to that store because of that. Stick to the stores we know. And as you get older, you realize, it was just a few specific experience that they had that you don't hopefully buy into. But I think, my sister and I will always have the experience of growing up as immigrants, and we talk about And when all this stuff really started come into play, the anti-Asian hate stuff that's been happening during these past year, and especially during the Trump administration, and calling it the Chinese virus and the Wuhan virus, I have to admit that my first instinct when I'm in fear, when there's something that I'm fearful of, is to diminish and to keep my head down, which is, I think, what we're taught as immigrants, is just to keep your head down. Keep your head down, don't make any waves. And I've really had to fight against that, because I think that was something that was kind of ingrained in me as an immigrant, as an Asian American, and that false narrative of the model minority, keep your head down and succeed, but don't make any waves, you know? And I think I've had to fight a lot of that instinct and to try to make waves and to actually use the voices that we have to say something and to disagree when we disagree. So
that is, because I've heard a lot of the conversations during the rise of the Asian hate campaign, that a lot of folks in the Asian community, or more folks of your parents' generation, are quieter about that. But that, from what you're saying, Jose, is also part of the immigrant experience, that the immigrant it keeps it to themselves more, keeps to themselves more.
I mean, I think it's a combination of these things, and it's not a great, it's kind of a perfect storm of dysfunction in some ways that keeps us in a place where we're used to, and we make it work by not kind of stepping out. And I think as I get older, I learned that the stepping out is not that easy, but it is how things get kind of discussed or changed or whatever. That's the best hope that you have of it. And this whole anti-Asian hate, or this whole Asian hate a period of time that we are processing right now, is very fraught, because you start to kind of, like Jose said, diminish the, well, okay, so nobody's being killed, but people are being pushed. Does that mean that it's less important? And should we be, at what level should we be really taking this and talking about it as if it was really, really super important, which it is. And I think our initial instinct is kind of to, first of all, we've all been dealing with this for our whole lives. And that's something that people don't really know. Jose's parents, Jose's family, Jose as an immigrant family, there's no question in my mind, like on an almost daily basis, you're dealing on some level with being misunderstood in some way. And so we are really used to it. And I think the main thing in talking about the whole Asian hate period of time that we're in is just basically explaining that it's a real thing. Yeah. And actually saying, you know what, actually this is this is not just like over there in Atlanta or over there and wherever. This is like a thing, and it's really real in a really everyday way, in a way that we grew up with, but we diminished it. And now we're actually kind of having to say, you know what, actually this is so real, and this is the fact that it has been real and back in our backgrounds and is happening now again. They're related. We didn't really complain about it before. We accepted it. We just made it part of our lives in a way that other ethnicities don't do in for different reasons. And so we've never taken to the streets. We've never, and we have a different way that the violence manifests itself. So we deal with it that way too. It's very complicated.
And even more complicated to understand, like I've had very well-meaning conversations with friends who, everyone wants to like start up a conversation, and I'm at a dinner party, and finally, and we keep talking about these general, like Asian American this, Asian American that. And I was like, can we just also acknowledge that Filipinos and Japanese people and Chinese people and Vietnamese people have very different histories in this country, and we react and have very different prejudices in this country. So whatever, pick a decade, and those different groups of people from different countries will react to different things in the news, and certain and specific people from specific countries will be prejudiced, will have major prejudice against them, while the others don't. So it's like it gets complicated because we're not one country. It's like Asian American is like such a wide, broad stroke, and obviously racists don't see that, but those different individual communities react very differently to hate. Some cower.
And you're all right. each community is brought up completely differently, raised differently. You're right. I mean,
and they're just as histories, that like the PBS did the incredible Asian American history, and they used individual, stories, but just to understand just the different decades of experience that the different countries have in this country is very telling. And if you are a first generation, second, third, fourth generation American in this country, your life experience is very, very different than people who came at a different time that your family did. So again, I only say that with the sense that like not everyone's experience is the same. Although we all, when we see hate, we react the same, obviously. But how we react personally, and you were telling us about the story about the girl, I always tend to ask, well, tell me what her family's like. Is her family freshly here, like my family was a generation ago, or is she
for my friend, we'll play the video later, but she is adopted, so she has
again, and that creates a complete difference.
It does, for sure. And for somebody her age, who's as sweet as can be, to have an experience like, it's just awful, awful. Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, is that something that, I did a show for Black History Month with some friends, and, we did it during February, but I know it's something you celebrate every day and not in May. But was it something that, when it was passed, I think it was 1990 when it was made into the month, was it something that you talk about that? I mean, for yourselves,
I don't have a recollection of it being passed as a month, partly because my long road from apathy to activism is goes back that far, and so I think I was probably not in touch with what it really meant to have that. But now I'm super into it, and I really feel just the way we also feel it when June rolls around and it's Pride. It's like wow, yes. Really, that's a thing to look forward to. It really is a thing to look forward to, and I'm very grateful for it, and really. I really like it.
It's a good excuse to like plan events to celebrate. Yeah. It's like Pride every year. It's like Asian Pride,
Right.
And so for us, it's like Asian Pride, and then it's Gay Pride. So it's like a good 2-month hit.
Yes, a 1-2 punch.
And I would understand that you probably are celebrating though throughout the year, that it's not just May. May might be a month where you're doing a little more. But the kind of celebrating that one does during the month is specific and related to consciousness raising or to sharing discussions like we're having right now. And because those discussions don't happen with the same kind of saturation at the rest of the year, it takes on a different color of your life. The pride of being Asian American, which of course is of course a daily thing. It's just part of you. That's a personal thing, and you experience it in different ways when you're with your family or when you're in an event or something like that. But May is special actually because there is I'm actually kind of really into the fact that they would designate these months for these communities so that the focus can actually be put on them, so that things can happen as a result, that discussions can happen, and they're sanctioned, and they're embraced by people, and to be quite honest, we're forced to look at them, and I think that's really cool. And I think this month, especially at this particular time when we're talking about the rise of hate in the Asian community,
right?
It's even more important. And
yes,
and I think more. And I'll ask about the media later, but media even just covering this month.
That's right.
In a larger way.
Yes.
I've noticed it with Black History Month. Let's say The View, they do, they highlight a person of color throughout February. Every day, somebody, to teach us about their community, which I think is fantastic. We all should learn about the different cultures, and we were talking about Gay Pride, but it's interesting, like the three of us, we are seen as other in more than one way, and have had, sadly, hate thrown at us for those, different ways.
Right.
Yeah.
Although I'm lucky, I'm just a little younger than BD, but to see BD, I saw BD because I didn't get to see M Butterfly in New York, but the first time I saw BD was in the movie And the Band Played On.
Oh wow!
And it meant everything to me that there was this Asian American character, and I remember, and my favorite line of the movie is he's an architect. It just because it was an ensemble cast, and it was a contemporary story, and he was a gay man with an American accent that it meant something to me, and
that was at a time when there wasn't much on television for us to watch.
No, there really wasn't. There hasn't.
The Band Played On was very early in gay,
right.
Media representation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But necessary doing when you come out as a senior in high school in 1994.
Yes,
so
great.
I ran to the video store and got every gay movie I could possibly, to Longtime Companion, and so I stacked them up and watched them in a weekend. I was
wow.
So but what's important is and I bring that up just because representation. Yes,
that was my next question, and it's perfect.
Who do we look up to, and who do we see? And when we see someone who is similar to us, it gives us hope that okay, maybe there's a place for me there. And I think what's powerful now, also that's the importance of this Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, is that it forces organizations to go, oh, it's this month that we have to celebrate Asian American people. How many people do we have in our company that are actually Asian American? And it stops them to acknowledge the existence of them, and maybe acknowledge that maybe they should have more, and maybe acknowledge that to bring those people out. Because my husband works at a company where he said, there is now a diversity group in their company that has come about in the last 5-10 years, and they use these months to really uplift the people in their company to say, okay, we are going to use this month to uplift your voice. Is there anything that you think that we can do better as a company to see you and to understand, and so that's where these months are really important, because it gives companies that wouldn't necessarily think about it go, okay, let's do this. It's going to be good for our company. It's going to be good for everybody. And let's talk, and so I think, hopefully it doesn't die down after May 31st passes, but hopefully that it keeps going for the rest of the year. But that's one of the main good things about the month, So
well, that's why these conversations are really important. You just have to keep talking, because conversations is where we all learn. That's something I really.
What I'm concerned about is that we've been sitting at home for 15 months, and the world is slowly opening right now, which is great.
Yeah.
Obviously, everyone wants it to happen, but there's going to be the slowdown of activism, because people are going to get back to their lives. People are going to start. And I'm guilty of it. I randomly got busy this month, and I had work, which was amazing. I wasn't just sitting at home pining after the death of theater, but but because of that, I was less. I was I was supposed to do this, letter writing campaign. I was supposed to do this phone bank, and I couldn't, because I was back to my work. I was back to work, and so this year has been special because a lot of people have been able to focus on their activism because we've been sitting at home, but also too because we also had a goal that was to get him out of office, which was a very immediate and specific goal, and we did it, and the country did it, and now we have to keep doing the work. And what's harder is finding the specific short-term purposes. Right now it's the mayor, who are we going to get for mayor? What's the next step that we can acknowledge that we can keep putting the right people in office to do the right things for everybody. So yeah, that's the hard.
True. So true. BD, Jose was talking about seeing you in The Band Played On. When you were growing up, representation for you, where did you find representation?
I think this is a huge topic for me. I struggled with it tremendously, and I struggled with it in specific to eventually wanting to become an actor. I was still a consumer of the television and film industry when I was making this decision, or when I was discovering within myself there was a potential for me to be a performer. And there was nothing I could do to quench or to quell the enthusiasm I had. I was completely, I'm sure Jose relates to this, this is an identity that you discover within yourself when you're young, if you're lucky, and you have that stimulus around you to help you do that. And so that wasn't going away. But on the other hand, everything outside of me pointed in the wrong direction. Like, it was like, well, if you're going to do that, well, what do you, like, really think about it. What are you really going to do? Like, what are you really going to do? And that was because it gets tired saying it, the lack of representation was extremely obvious.
Yeah.
And so that was a big part of the
motivator for you.
Yeah. It was a big what do you call it? A conflict, a huge conflict for me. And so there were, I was kind of too young for the full appreciation of George Takei in the original Star Trek, but his presence is really very powerful, actually, and especially now that he's like a gay icon, it's like really incredible.
It really is.
He's quite pioneer, heroic to me, and he was really the only one who was able to he was given an opportunity to be nothing but positive in his portrayal of that character. And he was something that Jose has mentioned, and it was really important to us. He was American. And that was really important. That's a touchstone for me too, even not as an immigrant. The stigma of being an immigrant, we all know about this now with all the stuff that's happening with the border and all of that stuff, but it is a stain on our reputation as a country, I think, that we have this conflicted view of immigration, and that there are people in this country who look down on immigrants and think that they're all the things that they think. And I felt that. I felt, well, as a person of color, any attachment you had to being an immigrant or speaking with an accent or all of those things, really stays with you. It really creates a great deal of conflict within you. And then when you go and become an actor, you really realize how deep this goes and how hard it is to change, and what a mountain you're really up against. And that's a whole other subject that I think is super important. The whole representation for me goes kind of two ways. When Jose is talking about the representation that happens within a company, and they say, like we want our Asian American employees to understand that they're appreciated and that we get them and that we want to nurture them and that we want to bring more people hopefully into the company and all that. That's one part of it, which is absolutely essential. But the other part of it is kind of in the aftermath of anti-Asian hate. There is this idea that has become very clearly in my consciousness, that we are misunderstood, that as a result of our misrepresentation in the media, people don't even know who we are. They don't know we're American. They don't know we're not immigrants. They keep asking us the same questions over and over again. And then they start doing stuff to people based upon acting out on this knowledge and misunderstanding of who we are. And so it behooves us to push the quality of our representation to a place where people can learn about us. So it goes way beyond, like, I've gone way past, oh, I'm an actor, I want to work, and I deserve to earn a living, which are all true things. I just, Jose and I deserve to work. We should be working more. We should have more opportunities. All of that stuff. That's all true. But what we really want is we want to put enough representation out there so that people can kind of demystify, or it can be demystified for people, what we are or aren't, so that we can be treated more nicely. Really, so we cannot be treated as poorly because of these misnomers about us. And every community has one. The gay community, I think, is leveling out its kind of representation to a point where we get to see different kinds of gay people in a more a little bit more of a diverse way, a little bit more. And Asian American people are now, what a concept, in television commercials where they weren't before.
Right.
You know, we were used to be completely shut out of all television commercials unless we were being something like really
Cliche.
cliche.
Yeah.
And now
And
we
you're-
are family members, and we have biracial families, and we
That's
have
what-
biracial relationships and all that stuff. And that's a huge part of clearing up this mess of misrepresentation. Misrepresentation isn't just not having enough representation. Misrepresentation is actually telling the wrong story about people.
Right. I mean,
well, it was like with gays, you know, early on. I mean, gays were always like the murderers or the
Yeah, well, they're suicidal because they're so unhappy.
Yeah, I mean, we had really horrible representation early on, but
and it's about
they-
the breadth of it, you know. I even just, I mean, it's shocking. It's not shocking because obviously we live in the real world, and how little we've gone in the past 30 years. That when a movie like Crazy Rich Asians comes out and it's so groundbreaking, you know.
Yeah.
And I've to have friends who I consider smart people say in my presence, "Wow, that Henry Golding is so hot. Who knew Asian men could be so hot?" I'm like, I'm standing right here saying that out loud to me. You know, it's because, I mean, I was a kid of the 80s and 90s. You grow up with the images of Asian men are either kung fu warriors or science geeks or Confucius say, you know, like that's such the extremes. And women were either these docile creatures or prostitutes, you know. And so there was no in between, because the cliche of the Asian American actor in the 70s, 80s, and 90s were always these characters. So that's what people knew. And so that's what they assume you were. And even when I started acting in New York, like script after script of these, like, you know, episodic things, I'd be like, okay, wow, they really are.
That's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and which is why, like, I don't want to turn this all into like BD changed my life, but like All American Girl, like when that came out on TV, I mean, the fact that it was a family, an American family with American accents, with the parents with the accents, obviously, but still, like,
But that's reality.
That's reality.
But an immigrant family, they would have the accents.
So, like, but then it premiered, it happened, but then it was gone. You know, it's like we need more of those. Now there's Fresh Off the Boat, and now people are actually growing up in a country where there's a wider range of Asian Americans on camera, movies where they go, oh, that's not me, but that's me. Oh, and that's not me.
That's right. Which is super healthy.
Super, because we didn't have that growing up. You know what I mean? We had Lung Duck Dong. We had all these specific characters that were there for Asian comic relief, or the assassin that was going to kill you. You know what I mean? So it's like there wasn't like a well-spoken best friend who just happened to be Asian, and you know, like, and that's where it's exciting now to watch TV shows where a character is Asian and there's no reason for it. It's just because they just happen to be a great actor and the casting director put them there, and it's fantastic. And it's just it's moving forward. It's, you know, as I look to our elders, you know, I hear their stories of like Alvin Aang, who like couldn't even get an audition even though it was an Asian part. You know, I think it's we honor them that they had to break those barriers for us, and hopefully we're going to go further. But it's all about putting the representation up there to say, you know, and I believe me, there's problems with the show with King and I know that there's issues with it, but the fact that I was able to tour the country, and a lot of people came up to me after the show and said, wow, I saw Yul Brynner, and you know, I'm like, that's great, you know, and then they're like, I've never seen the King as an Asian man. I'm like, excuse me, like it's because it, like, the society has made these characters where whitewashing was so regular. It was so just a part of the thing, you know, put a bald cap on someone and they're suddenly Siamese, you know. It just, so I mean, we're hopefully getting past that point, and also too, Asian writers are now writing their own stories and writing stories to cast us in, and Asian Americans are now the directors and the producers. And so when you get those people in the leadership positions, that's when things can change.
That's right.
When things can change.
It's so true. And you're talking about representation. I was watching an AAPI roundtable, and they mentioned that they did a survey of Americans to name one well-known Asian American.
Yeah.
And the number one answer was, I don't know.
Yeah, none.
Yeah.
Awful. I mean,
I mean, yeah.
Well, I mean, not to diminish that, there's a lot of dumb people in this world, and we see all the time. You know, it was very easy for Jay Leno to go out in the street and ask really dumb questions about people and get really dumb answers from them. You know, this is a thing. This is a thing that we have to accept in some ways, because it's a truth about our people in some ways, and I mean our American people. And so that wouldn't surprise either of us, Jose or I don't think. But yes, it's very telling. It does tell you this. It tells you what we're up against, and then it makes, to me, it actually makes the pain of anti-Asian hate better and worse in some ways, because I say, well, at least I can understand. You know, I'm not surprised that these things are happening because of the situation we're in, of the representation that we have or don't have, and all of that. That it's such a struggle that it shouldn't be surprising to us that people are behaving the way that they're behaving.
Well, sadly, you know, our previous president gave permission.
Yes.
You know, with his words and his actions, he gave permission. Just briefly, I don't want to talk about him at all, but just how did you feel when you heard him for the first time describe the virus in that way?
Oh, wow. Yeah. He had, from day one, he was extremely condescending and cruelly, he was just gross about all things like Chinese and China and from day one, really, the whole time, I've always cringed at just about everything he's ever said or done, you know. Yeah. And so you get to be very desensitized to it. But then when we got to that point, it was like, oh wow, you know. I guess my answer is like, I was like, yeah, there we go. There, I mean, that's what else.
Not surprising out of his mouth.
Yes, really, of course not.
Yeah,
no.
Yeah. Not surprising.
And no responsibility, no culpability, you know, like no like ownership of it at all. Just like what do you think? You know, like cluelessness.
Well, that's where it really upsets me when you know we were talking about my 15-year-old friend, because you know he gave permission to two men to verbally attack her.
Yes,
we're realizing
that's right. He did. Yeah.
Trump's. I mean, the what we're gonna feel, what I've realized, what I think the world's realized. I mean, I don't want to say his name again, but like him being around for 4 years, it showed that he didn't start all this. You know what I mean? Yeah. He's just the lucky bastard that got elected because there was this group that has existed since the beginning of time. Mm-hmm. And they are now getting stronger and bigger, and they're more vocal, you know, and they are less secretive about their existence. Before they were more secretive about it, but now they're not. Now they have people still in Congress who are representing them. And the most pathetic part of their existence is that it was more of a joke, I think, and they picked the weakest targets, were like Asian women and old people. It's like, really? Like, and so that's what's most infuriating. And because you can't, like, I can be angry about a smart person who's going to try to take away my rights and laws, and I can fight that. But I don't know how to fight a coward who's going to push an 85-year-old Asian lady on the street. Like, that's not someone that I know how to fight. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what to do to that. It's like the lowest kind of subhuman person that does. It's
the lowest denominator in people. Wow. You know, I mean, look, the rise of anti-Asian hate, the rise of anti-Semitism right now is ridiculous. The numbers of people being attacked, you know, in restaurants in California, they were going in looking for Jews last Friday or something. Do you worry about your family? You know, with when this had happened, do you know, I mean, you're talking, Jose, pushing an 80-year-old woman. I mean, you have parents and, and relatives.
That incident that really hit home for me was when that Filipino lady got hit in front of the building on 43rd Street.
Right.
In our
filming it.
In our old neighborhood. Old neighborhood.
We live on 42nd Street. You know what I mean? And like that, and the fact that the doorman didn't even help, that people like walked by, that could have been my mother. Like, my mother could have been walking down that street, going to my apartment on 42nd Street. And I hate that it took that for me to like, but My parents are fine. My of course, like right now, like everyone's still kind of shuttered in. Like my sister and my niece and nephew aren't vaccinated yet, so they're still kind of, like I don't know. I'm how do I say this? I've been a New Yorker for about 26 years now, and there were times I was home about 3 weeks ago, walking through Times Square, just because I had an appointment and I was walking through it. And it's, Times Square is still pretty empty right now. Nothing's happening there. And it was, I walked by some people that didn't look very safe. And I was like, wow, I've never felt unsafe walking through Times Square before.
Right.
And because like the whole anti-Asian hate was very big in the news that day. You know what I mean? And the thing that happened, the woman was just attacked on 43rd Street like a week before. So I came home that night and I told my husband, I was like, wow, I felt afraid at 2 p.m. walking through Times Square today. I'm trying to process that. Like I felt, and I remember I had a hat on, I put my hat down and I did what I said I wouldn't do, which was I diminished myself, thinking that I was going to help. It's so, it's stuff like that I go home and it drives me crazy. Like, what should I have done? Should I just take my hat off and walk proudly? I don't know. But like, it affected me that day. It affected me that day specifically.
But it's, I'm sure it is infuriating to even think that they had the power to make you feel that way.
That's right.
Even any specific person. It was just like the
right.
I had about
right. But that comes from
it's like, terrorism.
All of this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It really is domestic terrorism.
Yes.
There is no doubt. I mean, to feel that way. Has there been a moment during this? I mean, I guess for you, Jose, BD, did, anything happen, with the president giving voice to this that you felt unsafe or uncomfortable in any situation?
Well, I was, a prisoner in my own apartment. So, there was I was extremely diligent about not going out for a really long time. I haven't felt, but I don't know exactly why I don't feel more afraid of it. I think I at all costs try to avoid any kind of situation in which I'm in proximity to somebody, or that I'm, maybe that's what it is, that I already have a defense mechanism up. I think in general terms, I'm really mostly just concerned about the whole thing. Like on a very ongoing basis, I do think about my mom, who's really old and, really wonderful and everything, but she is extremely vulnerable. She's not quite at the point where she's going out by herself yet, but she is going out a little bit more. She'll be at the grocery store, something like that, and she might be, tooling in her cart around by herself while somebody who brought her there is doing something else, maybe. And so, but what, again, maybe it's the terrorist kind of thing. It's like, what do we do? Do we live in fear of anything happening at every moment, or do we have to kind of live our lives and try to, get some kind of perspective on it? I think I'm mostly motivated by the whole existence of it, and to try to kind of continue these conversations about it, because they are valuable to have, and to use the things that have happened to people and do something about them. I have had a lot of pretty intense conversations with particularly women that I know, Asian women that I know, who have really had a very challenging time of the thing that you're talking about, feeling that they could not go out, feeling that they could not dress a certain way, that all of this, just lots of different things that, like I said before, are ongoing daily things for them anyway. But this is all brought up for them a real seriousness to it, and a real fear in them that is actually of great concern to me. And
the murders in Atlanta must have really frightened for them to see that, and to see the reaction and how it was described you know, I mean, the police chief, right? I forget exactly how he phrased it.
Oh, that was bad. And he defended the guy who had done it by saying he had a bad day and all that stuff. Yeah, that was not cool. And yet
that is a polite way.
Yeah, and that is it is an opportunity for us to really look at this and kind of pull it apart and talk about it, because there have been any number of reactions to it, including his, that people have that need to be dealt with and discussed. And like, okay, why do you feel that way about this? Why do you feel so necessarily that they're absolutely not and can never be considered hate crimes? Or why do you consider them hate crimes? These are really important things to discuss, because the nuances of this are not necessarily cut and dried for people. And so therefore it behooves us to really kind of try to analyze them and talk them out. You know what a friend of mine did that on the surface looks like a little thing, but actually it was a really big thing. And it's something that I think everyone can do if the goal is to strengthen community, right? He's white guy in his 40s, lives up in Harlem. He goes to the same deli every day, like to pick up groceries and sandwiches, and it's owned by this Korean family, you know, and he went in there and he introduced himself for the first time, having seen them every day for like 5 years. And he just introduced himself. He just said, you know, I just want to know your name. My name is this. And just in case I see anything, that we have a connection now, and you know who I am. And you know that I see what I mean. He was embarrassed that he didn't know their names to begin with. It was the same family he'd known for 5 years, going down there every day, getting his coffee. But I think if we all did that, if people
really great
and reach out to the Asian people that you see every day in your community, it just builds the community better, so that if there's ever any kind of anti-Asian hate happening, that it's done to it's always been done to the community, but like people have names, and they're not just the Asian guy running the deli or the Asian taxi driver or that guy that lives in your building that you never say hi to. I don't know. It was a little thing to him, but it meant a lot, you know. And
no, that's a big thing. I was going to ask you what can people, you know, everyone says they want to be an ally of, you know, whether it's gay or Jewish or Asian. I mean, but you know, there are things, and that really is a great thing people can do.
That thing is an example of the concept of representation. In other words, you take a person and you take them out of the background and you put them in the foreground, and then you know them, and then you understand how they fit into the landscape of your life or whatever it is. But that's a kind of blurring, something blurry coming into focus. That is the kind of concept of what I'm trying to describe as representation. You know, like we need to be understood and not misunderstood. And so
to be seen,
to be seen. Yeah.
To know someone's name is to be seen, I think. You know, we should
right.
all. Yeah. I mean, right. I mean,
yes,
you know, who's an Asian American, you know? Nobody.
Yes, that's right. Right.
You know,
yes, that's right. Say that. And that's, you know, we this is a thing. Say their names. It's a thing. We know we want the humanization of a person and making them a three-dimensional person and not a statistic or not an extra in the scene of your life. You know, that kind of a thing it's all symbolically all of the stuff that we're talking about.
And I think that's what's important is to have the hard conversations. You know, because in polite society, it's easier for us to go to dinner with friends, and I think I've been very guilty of it, where I've heard someone say something, I was like, oh,
you just let it go, yeah.
Oh, and like this, everyone's having a nice dinner, you know.
Thing, yeah.
It's a thing.
That's a real thing.
In polite society, I don't want to ruin, because I remember ruining a dinner. Ruined a dinner. I ruined a dinner about 6 months ago. It was one of the first dinners my husband and I went out, and you know, I would find myself at a table with 5 white men, you know, and the topic of Black Lives Matter came up.
Oh God!
And I guess they felt safe with an Asian American. They just started talking as if there were no people of color in the room. Like, you know, and I had 3 martinis in me, and I was like, you know what? That's the problem, you know. And I think we had a very uncomfortable conversation, but those uncomfortable conversations have to happen, you know. And I think, and even more so with our good friends. And they thankfully this group of people were not good friends; they were just acquaintances, which is why it ended badly. So, but I think reach out to people and say, you know, I want a better understanding of your experience. And that's the thing. Just listen. You know, when Black Lives Matter happened, there was a big rush to like call all the Black people, you know, like, I'm your friend, you know, like, no, that's not going to help. I called my sister's best friend, who happens to be African-American, who I grew up with. She's, you know, we went to the same high school, and I emailed her and I said, you know, can we have a conversation? I just want to know your experience, and I want to know what it's been like for you to be a 47-year-old Black woman in this country. And I'm just going to listen. I just want to listen, you know, and it meant a lot. It meant a lot to just listen without any like, oh, I felt I had that experience. No, I didn't. I just want to listen to yours, go home and process it. And I think if people do that more and not necessarily try to equate their experience with someone who's had a very different experience and just listen and understand where they're coming from, I think a lot of people would maybe understand our communities better. Do you know what I mean? Like I don't have to have the same experience as a Black person to hear their experience and to try to understand it. And the same with Asian Americans. You know, I have friends who were like, oh, you don't have any, you've never felt prejudice. I'm like, yes, I have. Like, why would you not think I haven't, you know? And so like, it's about that conversation, you know? And I think,
I really think everybody has felt
something, right? But also,
you know,
it's dispelling that model minority myth. You know what I mean? It's dispelling, you know, like, oh, it's a lot of things, you know? And I think it's one of those things that all of us have our built-in prejudices that we don't even know we have. You know, I have white friends who didn't realize that they had these kind of like cliche understandings of Asian culture. You know what I mean? And that they talk about it and they act on it. And I'm like, okay, I think you're trying to make a joke, but that's not funny. Like, stop thinking that's funny, and stop thinking I'm a good enough friend that you can say that in front of.
Right.
Because it's not funny anymore. Like, maybe it was funny when we were in 8th grade, but it's not funny anymore. And by you keeping saying it, and oh, Jose's my friend, he doesn't mind it. Like, I do mind it, and it's stuff like that. Like, I think, you know, we're actors, we're around funny people, and everyone makes that racist joke, and we think it's hilarious. But like right now, I've been keeping mind, like I've stopped making jokes. So I think there are many jokes out there.
I keep going back in my head about, you know, I mean, I have friends who, you know, and I laughed with them making Jew jokes, and I probably made a Jew joke about myself, but you know, it's not funny anymore. You know, it's really not, when people are being hurt in so many communities. And you know, for me, it was, you know, it took a long time to understand what my parents lived through as Holocaust survivors. I mean, if they didn't find people, you know, Catholic people who risked like 9 people's lives to save my parents, I would not be having this conversation.
Yeah.
Like you know, there are people who risked an enormous amount of people's lives just to save 2 strangers, my mother and grandmother, or my father and his family. You know, like I wouldn't be here. You know, I try to say sometimes when I do a show like this is think about that, because what would you do in that same situation? If that, you know, look at what happened at the Capitol insurrection. I mean, you know.
What I've heard that's been happening, a couple of people were talking about on social media, bystander training. Like, they have organizations that if you want, they have workshops that just say, look, if you see someone, if you see something bad happening to someone, what's the immediate things you can do as a bystander to help the situation, you know? And there's like these keywords like distract, to turn your camera on, like everything that you can do immediately as someone who's just walking by the street and seeing something that should not be happening, you know? And it's, you know, I talk about it all the time. Like, the world is changing, and it's because of the internet. It's because of social media. Like, we're uber connected, but we're also so isolated. It's this horrible dichotomy of a technology. But because of it too, like, everyone has a camera on their phone now, which is changing the world. It is absolutely changing the world. And in response to any any hate, that's why, the police reform is happening, is because people have cameras on their phones. And so if we can video it, if we can take pictures of it, it's going to help. And so there's just the whole, everyone just can Google bystander training. It's really fascinating. And they're doing it in every major city now. And you can log into a website that's going to tell you exactly where, and they do.
I love that.
Websites. It's also quick. There's I should know the exact words. I just read it a couple of days ago, but it's like DDD, like distract. And it just goes through the things that you can do if you see something that's beyond just see something, say something. Just turn your phone on and take a video.
And I wanted to put this up as well if anyone wants more resources as well. Are there things you feel the media gets right now because it is so prevalent in the media?
Sure.
ABC did this great thing a couple months, and it was just awesome. It was about, they did this huge story about the anti-Asian hate. It was right after Georgia. It was right after Atlanta, and it was so refreshing to see all these Asian American reporters from different networks and different. It was all ABC, but different different affiliates come in to do it and give their experience. And I've never been more aware. I'm a big TV news junkie, but I've never been more aware. And I started following 25 different Asian American reporters that night on Twitter. And it was just really powerful to see all of them come together and do that and tell their stories from different perspectives, from the news perspective. That I enjoyed that a lot. I enjoyed that.
BD, for you?
I've been reasonably satisfied with the coverage and the positioning of the conversation. And I think that a lot of groups and media groups have been, all of the videos that have been, there's a lot of videos that have been made that have been out there to kind of tell a different facet of the story that we're trying to tell. Different versions of it. There's a nice video by the people at Netflix Animation, which has a lot of Asians in animation in it, and they talk about kind of just through the contributions of Asians in animation, they could kind of three-dimensionalize our various identities, all the different things we do, kind of thing. And so there's a lot of different, there's a lot of content like that's out there. And I think that's definitely a lot of media organizations and orgs taking the, reins and
taking it. Yeah. And speaking of social media, Jose, it was Olivia Munn going on social media to catch the person who pushed that woman down, right? Wasn't it?
I think so. Yeah. It's the power. Has been, again, it's social media. They're going to be writing it. 50 years from now, we are living in the middle of the social media age. It's like the golden age, and the world is changing. We're uber connected because of it. But it can, if we use it for the powers of good, right. It can work. You know what I mean? So I think, it's hard. Back then, 10, 12 years ago, we were still not really all jumping on it. But now everyone's just so uber connected to what's, it's like within minutes you hear the news as opposed to waiting until 6 o'clock to hear it on the evening news. So, which means at times that it drives you crazy, but at the same time, at least that you can be uber connected to the most recent thing to care about and to fight for. So.
Very true. So last Thursday, the House voted and President Biden signed the COVID-19 Anti-Asian Hate Crimes Act. Do you feel progress with that a little?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think anything that happens in this administration with an Asian vice president, is miraculous to me. And
representation.
Things are not. Yeah, that's not an accident. That's a thing that actually happened because of that chemistry between them and because of her presence there, and that even if that's all it is an example of something that they did together.
Right.
That's all I need. But as an act, it's also it's not unsubstantive. It's very important for the look. We experienced 4 years of a leader, so quote unquote leader, who did not come to the defense of anyone, who did not care about anyone. And so for a leader to take the responsibility to say this is wrong, and this is how we operate as a country, this is the way that I see it, is meaningful, because it starts from the top down, and we learn from example, and that's why we're in this mess. Partly is because we learned from example, and we had a bad example for 4 years.
And I'm even more excited when I see our Democratic Party have more and more representation of not just
women, not just white men. I mean, it's a colorful spectrum of,
and I wonder that's why like things are discussed that need to be discussed. And when you have a room that's not just full of white men, white straight men, you know what I mean? So it's just absolutely inspiring, and to see the cabinet and all the important jobs that are being held by women and by people of color. It says everything, and like we keep talking about representation. It shows that little kid that you can be, attorney general, you can be, secretary of state. There's a lot of different roles that need to be filled with people of color and women, because they're there to fill, and so it's important.
Yeah, 100%. Well, before I let you go, I mean, guys, thank you so much for doing this. We spoke about my friend Tuesday, who I did the interview with, who I'm going to play in just a minute. Mm-hmm. Youth have been severely impacted by the pandemic and by the rise of hate against AAPI. And like I said, she was verbally attacked in Atlanta 2 days before the George Floyd murder. And she was so deeply impacted by this that she didn't want to go out after that incident and into big stores anymore. What would you say to her and other young kids who are living through this moment and experiencing,
God, it's hard. I mean, to stay strong, know that there are people out here who are willing to protect them and fight for them. But to be smart, and to know that we are stronger in numbers, that don't try to do anything, that's going to get you in those situations. But at the same time, it's hard. I don't want to say something that sounds so cliche, but it's like, but stay strong.
Stay strong is an important one. I agree. And I think
we're in the middle of it now. Yeah.
Her speaking with me is even, that's a big step for a 15-year-old. I don't know that I could have done it at 15, to speak out about it and show that like the both of you, she wants to, to do something about it.
It seems like on some level she's aware of the impact a person can have. It's like Jose was saying, we're so connected now. We understand the power and the pain of the internet and social media, and so I think she possibly has an awareness of what that can mean. This is going to happen. You're going to put it out here, and there's something that can be done for someone else, or something that can be learned from it, or something positive that can come from it. That's great. That's wonderful. Don't give up. That's a really great thing to always try to do.
Gentlemen, thank you. This has really been amazing. I appreciate you spending the time with me.
Yes, we appreciate you doing it.
Thanks, Alan, so much.
Yeah.
Stay well. Hope to see you both in person one of these days.
Okay. Yes, for sure.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
And like I said, please watch this short interview with my 15-year-old friend, Tuesday. Joining me now from Atlanta is 15-year-old Tuesday, who is an Asian American. Tuesday was verbally assaulted back in May of 2020 while out shopping at Lowe's home improvement stores by two white men. I wanted to speak with Tuesday today about her experiences as an Asian American living in Atlanta and hear how this has been affecting her life and learn how she is dealing with it. Please welcome to the locker room my friend Tuesday. Hi, Tuesday. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. I know how important this whole conversation is to you. To start, can you talk about growing up as an Asian American in Atlanta, before the previous administration started name calling, what was life for you like before?
Well, there have always been like minor instances of racism, but most of the time it will like go over people's heads as like a joke. So like the eye polling and like the calling Asians yellow. And I didn't really realize that this it was gonna be a thing when I heard like Trump call COVID like the China virus. I knew it was wrong and I knew it was racist, but I never thought it would be like such a thing and carry on for how like until up now and probably.
Right, and that other people would use those words as well. You know, he gave by him using it, he gave people permission to use it themselves, which is what happened to you when you were out at the Lowe's home improvement store. Can you talk about that if you're comfortable? You know what happened there?
Yes. So I was waiting for my dad at a Lowe's, and it was the first time I had like gone out in public since like quarantine and the pandemic. And I was alone, and two white men walked by and they kept laughing and turning around, calling me the China virus. And it was very threatening, and I was afraid to go out in public after that. And it really like I didn't realize that like until then like the impact like those words had and like the like people's beliefs, I guess, and how they thought it was okay. That was really startling to me.
Yeah, it's startling to all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Startling to all of us that anyone thinks that that is right. Can you talk about what has frightened you most during this time of racial unrest? I know you and your mom participated in the Black Lives Matter movement, but can you talk about some of that?
Well, I feel like what's like frightened me most about this was the randomness of it. Like you see the videos on the news and everywhere, and you see like how can one person with one crazy mind have such an impact and normalize this, you know? And why is it still going on? I feel like that's the most shocking and like frightening part about it.
Mm. And do you remember what you felt, you know, when the murders happened in Atlanta?
It was like very personal to me because, and the fact that they didn't, like they said it wasn't a hate crime and the guy just had a bad day. That was incredibly disturbing. And I didn't, like, I visited the two of the sites on where it happened. And it's close to like where, like it's by like where I like know, and we passed by there a few times before it happened. And I think driving down that road, it was like, it was shocking. And yeah, it impacted me a lot. And
I'm sure what happened to you at Lowe's impacted you. Hearing the former president use those words and those horrible murders, I'm sure impacted you. But you know, January of 2021, we had a new administration, and we had a vice president who is half Asian come into the White House. How did that make you feel?
I love her, and I was like totally so overwhelmed with happiness. Like watching her, I was like, wow, like I feel like we're making a tremendous amount of like progress. But I'm also like, what took so long, you know? But yeah, I love her so much.
Good. She's a great role model, you know, for for all, not just in the
Yeah.
Asian and Black community. She is a good role model for all. What do you want people to know who are watching today? In your eyes, how can someone watching help? How can they be an ally?
Well, I think it's important to remember that all the racial reckoning that's happening, it isn't just a hashtag. There's real meaning, and there's stories behind every one of these people. And I feel like that's important to take into consideration. And because so many people post I don't know, for clout, I guess, I stand with you, but do you really? If so, reach out to us. Reach out to your friends who are being impacted by this, and check in and see how we're doing. And
Don't just use the hashtag.
Mhm. And I think we have a long way to go, but it's important that we're talking about this because that can raise awareness. And I think awareness is really important right now.
I completely agree. And that's why I really appreciate you doing this. And it's why I'm doing it. I'm sure your mom has told you, my parents were Holocaust survivors. And, if it wasn't for people risking their lives, I wouldn't be alive today to be doing this with you, So it is important that we have allies and that people stand up and speak up. I don't have the words. I should have had President Biden's speech from last Thursday when he signed the Hate Act, because he said some of those things that, we all must pay attention. We all must stand up for what is right. How does it make you feel knowing that bill got passed so quickly, the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act?
It's very it makes me feel like there's some light at the end of the tunnel. That all this horrifying crimes and these horrifying things you see, there has to be some way to make that all not go away, but just to heal, for the hearts that have been broken to heal. And I feel like that's the big thing that I see in that.
Does it give you hope?
Yes. Yeah.
Going on these the Black Lives Matter protests with your mom, does it give you is this something you might want to do, be a social activist? Has it crossed your mind what you might want to do down the road?
At this moment, I would love to be a broadcasting journalist, or some way in that, because I love writing, and I love being on my hands and feet, being with people who have different circumstances and different ways of living, and I like writing about that. So I think that's what I'm gonna do one day.
You should start doing that now. You should start writing, some of these experiences. Well, Tuesday, I really can't thank you enough. It is important. I know it was difficult for you to do this with me, but it is important to speak up. People should know that these words, these actions are having an impact on our young people. And nobody at 15 years old should have to be in a Lowe's department store, a Lowe's home improvement store, and be frightened by two white men who are using racial slurs. That should never happen. And I really appreciate you being here, and you stay well. Okay.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Tuesday, for speaking with me. As Vice President Harris and President Biden said last Thursday when signing the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, the truth is racism exists, xenophobia exists, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, homophobia, transphobia. It all exists. Silence is complicity. With the rise of attacks against the Asian and Jewish communities on the rise, as Americans, we cannot be complicit. As I leave you today, remember, we all have choices to make in life. Speak up, do the right thing. Let's all stand together to combat this virus of hate. Thank you so much for watching.